India before the British was not the nation state that we know it as today, nor was Pakistan. This whole region was an interconnected, fluid, complex network of kings, cultures, religions, and trade routes. Sometimes some of them were united, sometimes some of them fighted, but they were never clearly divided the way the colonial border is. People moved, people married, people traded. This is an entire subcontinent. It does a disservice to the culture of this entire region to lump it into homogenous labels like India and Pakistan. So how did they do it? The British used a combination of backroom deals, secret treaties, military protection agreements, and funding rebels or rivals. They would find small indigenous groups and elevate them, make them dependent on you. Because if the minority rules, they need British guns to stay in place. In the Punjab region, they supported Sikhs as a buffer between Afghan and Muslim leaders. In Bengal, they backed the Muslim landlords over the Hindu peasants. In Burma and northeast India, they would elevate Christian converts into admin roles over the Buddhist and tribal majority. The British strategy was rule indirectly, profit directly. Local rulers who would tax their own to pay Britain. They created these princely states. There were over 500 scattered kingdoms left with semi-independence under British control. Their survival relied on the British Raj. The British love to weaponize your identity, turning religion and caste and personal identity into a political weapon. The census of India in 1871 forced people into very rigid religious and caste boxes. They had separate electorals. Hindus vote for Hindus, Muslims vote for Muslims. And they had different legal codes, different laws for Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. The outcome of these structures is that Hindus and Muslims stopped being neighbours with different religions and started being political enemies. This was done by design. Wherever people mixed, the British separated them. They would fund Muslim schools and Hindu schools separately. They would fund Hindu promotion campaigns, language campaigns, and Urdu campaigns, language campaigns, separating them. They would literally split neighbourhoods and communal zones. They used propaganda, newspaper, books, educational materials to frame Hindus and Muslims as these eternal rivals. By the time they left, communities that for centuries had traded and mingled and intermarried were now deeply suspicious of each other. The partition of 1947 was not ancient hatred. It was manufactured trauma. Generations of divide and rule, propaganda and manipulation by the British. Colonial textbooks published in India reframed the Mughals as invaders. It made Hindus the victims and the British the saviours. Because of these land reforms and separate voting rights, because of the manipulation of Mughal history, because of the census that forced these people to solidify an identity, Indians were used to suppress other Indians. People internalized these identities. Communities began organizing politically against each other, not the colonizer. And local conflicts became national crisis as a way to make the British presence feel necessary. Divide and rule is not just a strategy, it is the architecture of the British Empire. They didn't just exploit divisions, they mapped them out. They built them, they rewarded your loyalty to the empire. It became law, it became governance, it became policy. List of policies. The Indian Councils Act of 1909, the Partition of Bengal in 1905. The Census Act of 1871, the Communal Award of 1932, the Government of India's Act of 1935. They implemented separate legal codes for communities. Their policies classified certain ethnic groups as martial races to recruit them for the army. The British had complete control of the free press and education in India and used that to actively promote narratives that emphasized the differences among the communities. They had policies that maintained British alliance with princely states, allowing them some level of autonomy in exchange for tax and loyalty. And the Permanent Settlement Act of 1793 created a landlord class. Before this, land tax in India were flexible based on harvest. Under the Permanent Settlement, Samandirs became official property owners, obligated to pay a fixed amount to the British every year. This loyal landlord class became enormously powerful, aligning their interests firmly with British colonialism. Their economic status and power was dependent on British backing, permanent loyalty. Multiple subsequent British Parliament debates acknowledge that this policy resulted in widespread impoverishment. To simplify thousands of years of history of an entire continent down to Hindus versus Muslims is a very British policy thing to do. It simplifies a deeply complex civilization where class and racial and religious boundaries were not actually set in stone. There were a lot of shared spaces, multilingual cities, and interfaith families. Yes, local conflicts existed, but partition-level divide? Religious apartheid? Mass ethnic cleansing? Where have you heard that before? That scale of violence was fertilized by generations of British manipulation and lies, and it exploded under the pressure of their rushed, careless exit